everyone, my name's Ebony. Welcome back to my channel.
Think I know you better to forget her. Certain people made for running. Think I need you more than let you know I'm bored and tell me this means more than nothing.
So today I'm filming the mid-year book freakout tag. Yay! Everybody has been doing this tag lately, and I have done it once before. I did it the very first year I started BookTube, but I didn't do it last year because I think at that point I was in like kind of a filming slump, and I remember I planned it out, but I never like actually filmed it. But we're doing it this year because I feel like I missed out last year and everybody's doing it, so we're jumping on the bandwagon. Also, I couldn't figure out who the original creator of this tag was. If you know, please like comment down below and I will tag their original video, because so many people have done this video that like I couldn't find it when I was scrolling on YouTube. But before we get into it, I'm going to give you a little bit like of a brief overview of all the books that I've read this year. So far I've read 79 books, which is wild. I am 16 books ahead of schedule according to Goodreads and Storygraph. I've been reading a lot lately this summer, which is totally awesome. I've read 26,693 pages, and I'm currently in the middle of 4 books right now. I'm reading Ninth House by Lee Bardugo, Last Sacrifice by Rochelle Mead. I'm reading the Vampire Academy movie guide thing that I started like a long time ago. And then I'm also reading Never Enough by Denise Jayden, and hopefully I'll finish that either like today or tomorrow. And then I'm about to start the audiobook for Sky Beyond the Storm by Saba Tahir. It's because I need to finish that before the month ends. Getting into the questions. First question is, best book you've read so far in 2020? Hands down, that book is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I absolutely adored this book. I read it in January, and I think it was my first 5-star read of the year. Either that or it was Where the Forest Meets the Stars. I can't really remember, but they were both really, really good. But I chose this one for this question. This book follows 2 characters, Victor and Eli, and they are both, it's told in dual timelines. So in one of the timelines, they're both going to college, and they're working on their thesis, and their thesis is over EOs, or extraordinary people who have like supernatural abilities, and they discover how you can become an EO. And then the second timeline is 10 years later, after Victor has just gotten out of jail and he is dead set on killing Eli, and you're like, what's happening? This book had so much mystery. I had so many questions. As soon as one question was answered, boom, I would have another question. And the characters were absolutely amazing. The way that V.E. Schwab explored the powers was really cool. There was some things that I wish she had explored more, but I've heard that that does happen in Vengeful, which is the sequel, and we'll get into that one. I actually read this for my book club. While I was reading it, I was like taking notes of my thoughts. I read it on ebook, and I don't usually read books on ebook, but so I would like sit here, be reading or whatever, and then I would like think of something, so then I would just like tab over to my Google Doc that I had on my phone and then like type out my thoughts. So I have a very extensive, very stream of consciousness, really random list thing of all of my thoughts while I was reading this book. And so if you have read this, you should definitely go check out my Goodreads because I posted it on there. It is very, very spoilery, so if you haven't read it, don't read it. But if you have and you want to read my really weird, funny thoughts while I was reading this, go check out my Goodreads, link down below. I absolutely loved this book. The next prompt is the best sequel you've read so far in 2020. This was kind of a hard one because while I have read a lot of sequels, not many of them were like amazing or stood out, but I chose A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green. I read this recently. This sequel wasn't as good as Absolutely Remarkable Thing, which I read in a day. I was so hooked. I was so interested in what was happening. This book wasn't like quite as intriguing to me as the first book was, but like I needed to know what happened. So I did still enjoy it. I gave this one 4 stars, whereas I gave An Absolutely Remarkable Thing 5 stars. It was still really, really good, but it wasn't as good as the original. Yeah, none of the sequels I've read this year really stand out as much, so I went with this one. So basically the storyline for this book is, in the first book, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, this character named April, which actually her name is April May, and I'm like, what kind of name is that? One day she's in New York and she spots this like statue of a person kind of thing, and she was like, oh, this is kind of funny, and her friend make like a little video of them like interviewing the statue, kind of just like a funny thing. But then it goes viral because these things, which they call Carls, pop up like everywhere in the world, and people are like, what is this? What's happening? Like there's really, really weird stuff going on with these Carls. And so I don't know, it was really interesting, and you're just like, what's happening? What does this mean? Like there's so many like mysteries and clues and things to figure out in this book. So I really enjoyed that. The next question is new release you haven't read yet but want to get to soon. And that is The Light Through the Leaves by Glendy Vanderhaeghe. So Glendy Vanderhaeghe is the author of Where the Forest Meets the Stars, which I just mentioned. This is her sophomore album. This is her sophomore book, I believe. It came out in April, and I was like super pumped to read it, and then I ordered a copy from my bookstore that I work at, and like I still haven't gotten to it yet. I'm super excited to read it. I just like, I don't know, I haven't like been grabbing it for whatever reason. I think it's very different, like it's a different premise than Where the Forest Meets the Stars, which I absolutely loved that book. But I'm still excited to read it nonetheless. Another new release that I'm pretty excited for is Blackbird Girls by Anne Blankman. Although I have heard some not so great things about that book. That book is kind of about Chernobyl, and I think Chernobyl is really interesting, like just the whole thing behind it. So I was really excited when I heard that there was a book coming out that was about Chernobyl. So I am excited to read it, but I'm a little like hesitant because I've heard not the greatest reviews about it. Next question is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I'm really bad with new releases. I'm bad at keeping up with new releases until like they're out already, which is funny because I work at a bookstore, so you would think I'd be like pretty good about knowing what's coming out. But I don't know, like I feel like I just never really like pay attention, and then it's out and I'm like, oh hey, that sounds good, you know? Like one of my most anticipated releases, I guess, for the end of this year is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the author of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and Good Girl Bad Blood, which I read both of those books earlier this year. They're just like murder mystery books, and the main character Pip has like a podcast where she talks about her murder mysteries, and the audiobooks are really well done. They have a good production with like recording sounds and like different voice actors and all of that. So I'm really excited for the third book to come out in September, I believe. I didn't realize that there was going to be another book, and when I finished Good Girl Bad Blood, I was kind of disappointed because the ending wasn't very like closed. And so I was like, oh man, like I didn't know that there was going to be a third book. And then when I was editing the video where I talked about that, I found out that there is going to be a third book. So I'm like, yay, I'm excited. My biggest disappointment. This is kind of hard to narrow down. I think I have like 4 options here. First is Lakewood by Megan Giddings. So this book I actually heard my friend Stephanie from Stephanie Bookish talk about, and she mentioned that there was body horror in it, and I was like, yes, give me the body horror. And then I read it, and then there actually wasn't that much body horror, so I was kind of bummed that it didn't really like live up to that expectation that I had of that book. Basically, the character in that book does a like scientific study sort of thing, like one of those studies where you get paid and it's like you sign non-disclosure agreements and all of that kind of thing. So it is kind of creepy in like the medical aspect of like the body horror, but there really wasn't that much that happened, so I was kind of bummed. Another option for that question is The Project by Courtney Summers. A lot of people have mentioned that they were disappointed by this book, and I am one of them, because this book, like the premise is about a girl whose sister has joined a cult, and now the girl is going to try to like find her sister and like figure out what's going on with this cult. And I was like, yes, cults, give it to me. And then like it barely even talked about the cult. So I was really bummed about that. The ending kind of got into that culty aspect that I was really hoping would just be like throughout the book, but it really only happened at the end. So another book I picked for this prompt is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I read this book at the beginning of the year because I heard it is like so heartbreaking and so sad, and I love a sad book. And then I read it, and the like the plot twist at the end that's supposed to be sad, I wasn't even like really shocked by. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what's happening? Okay. Like I didn't even care. I was like, oh, alright. Like that's a choice. So yeah, I was bummed that I wasn't hit as hard by that book as a lot of people tend to be. And then last for my disappointing reads is Never Enough by Denise Jayden. I'm actually not finished with this book yet. I think I'm 200 pages in. But so far, it has been pretty disappointing. I'm reading it for a reading vlog that I'm doing with eating disorder / mental health rep. And I was promised eating disorder rep. I've barely gotten any of it. Honestly, for the most part, this book's kind of just boring and the main character is annoying. And there really isn't much eating disorder things that are happening. I love me a good eating disorder book. I'm weird. But yeah, so this book doesn't have what I was hoping it would. so far, so I'm pretty disappointed by it. Maybe it'll take a turn toward the end, but I doubt it. Next is biggest surprise. So the most obvious pick for this question was Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doughty, mostly because this book is nonfiction, and I don't read nonfiction typically, but I saw it at the bookstore that I work at. And the title was intriguing. Will my cat eat my eyeballs? Like, what? And then, I read, the first 2 pages at the store before I shelved it, and I was like, I really like the writing style of this. This sounds really interesting. The author is a mortician, and basically the book is just her answering questions that people have about dead bodies and, how dead bodies decay and how that all happens. So, yeah, I was really actually intrigued by the premise of this book, and I read it almost in a day. I started it when I got off work, and then I fell asleep while I was reading it, and then I finished it the next morning. So pretty much in a day. It was very quick, and the audiobook is narrated by the author, so that was really fun to listen to as well. And the book was actually pretty funny. The author has a good writing style, so it kind of is a good combination of really dark, kind of creepy, macabre topics, but the funny part of it kind of keeps you from getting too creeped out. So favorite new author, either a debut author or a new to you author. So I'm probably gonna have to go with Glendy Vanderraa, which, like I said, is the author of Where the Forest Meets the Stars and the author of this book that I'm hoping to read, The Light Through the Leaves. Also, I think that Hank Green is one of my favorite new authors, just because I loved An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And like I said, the sequel was still good, it just wasn't as good. And plus I follow Hank Green on TikTok, so it's kind of fun because you get to know the author more than just the books. Newest fictional crush, definitely Maxon from the selection. Technically I read this first book in the selection last December, but I read books 2, 3, and 4. I still haven't finished the last book yet this year, so I'm counting it. I loved Maxon. He was so cute and so amazing, and definitely better than Aspen. Gross. We don't like Aspen. All the Aspen slander. I hope that you all know what the selection is about. It's a pretty popular book. Basically, it's a Bachelorette-esque kind of story that's dystopian, and the main character gets picked for this thing called the selection, where Maxon the prince chooses his bride out of 35 girls, and it's like The Bachelor. Newest favorite character, definitely Victor Vale from Vicious. He was absolutely amazing, and it was great because you could really see that line of good versus evil being blurred, because he's not the bad guy, but he's not a good guy, you know? And he definitely, he wants to kill his ex-best friend, that's insane. But his ex-best friend has kind of done worse stuff, you know? So it's a really interesting dynamic here of really showing that people aren't all good or all bad through Victor. And also I have recently found out that Victor is actually Ace, so he gives a little bit of representation there. It comes out more, I heard, in the second book than in this one, but I'm really excited to find that Ace rep in the second book. Book that made you cry, definitely All This Time by Rachel Lippincott and Mickey Daughtry. This is the author of 5 Feet Apart. It's right here, and I don't want to pull it out of the stack because it's in a stack. I think that 5 Feet Apart has 3 authors, but these are 2 of the authors of that book. And All This Time follows a character who is dating this girl, and then they're about to break up, and then there's a car accident, and then she dies, and then he meets a new girl. So it's kind of he goes through that grief process, and then he starts to find a new relationship eventually, but then another thing happens that's a really, really big plot twist, and I was sobbing the entire time. I remember reading it, and my roommate walked past my room, and I'm just sobbing on my bed listening to the audiobook, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm just reading this book and it's really sad." I cried a lot. Book that made you happy. I chose Broken in the Best Possible Way by Jenny Lawson for this prompt. It's not necessarily a happy book, but it's really funny. Jenny Lawson has a really funny way of looking at things. And this is actually a memoir, so it's about her life. So it is funny, but she also does talk about her mental health. So there's a little bit of a more sobering factor in there as well. I laughed so hard while I was reading this book. I'm really excited to read Jenny Lawson's other books as well. Most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. So I chose 2 books for this. One was One Great Lie by Deb Coletti. This is actually an ARC that I got from the bookstore that I work at, but look at how gorgeous. I love the color palette for this book. Unfortunately, I didn't actually like the book that much, so like I don't know if I should keep it or if I should maybe like give it back to the store or pass it on. I don't know, but I love the cover, so I'm like torn if I want to keep it or if I should get rid of it. Basically, the premise of this book is that the main character goes to Venice to study with a famous writer there, and it's really interesting, and I talked about this in a vlog recently that I did where I finished this book. It's really interesting because she's going there to study with this author, and so they do that, but then there's also like a weird subplot of her and this other guy where they're looking into this woman who is her ancestor, they believe, who they believe was a writer who then got their work stolen by a man, because back in the day women couldn't really like speak out about that kind of thing. And so it's weird because there's that, and then the plot with the author, and then there's stuff that happens with the author as well. So it feels like that there's two plots. Like, it feels like it's two different stories, and the author tried to like mush them together. And then the ending was pretty sad. Like, I thought this book was going to be a lot fluffier than it was. I just didn't really vibe with it that much. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay, but it was kind of slow, and like it didn't feel like it was a very cohesive story. The other book I chose for a beautiful cover is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. First, I love the color palette. The light blue and the hot pink and the yellow. The yellow on the book itself, like, it's just so pretty. This is Taylor Jenkins Reid's newest book. I believe it came out like beginning of June. And I read it immediately after it came out. Like, the day that we received it in the store, which actually we received it a couple days early before it was supposed to come out, and it's also a signed copy, I like immediately bought a copy, and then I went home and started reading it that night because I was so excited for this book. Basically, this book follows 4 main characters who are siblings, and they are the children of a very famous singer from like 60s named Mick Riva, and it's really a family drama. It talks about the dynamic between their family over the course of their lives, and so it's kind of told in dual timeline as well, because the one timeline takes place on the day of the famous Riva party. It's this party, it's like the place to be in Malibu, that the children Rivas throw every year, and it's always like a wild time. And so like it takes place on that timeline, like during the day of that party, but then also there's like a lot of flashbacks into how their parents met, how they grew up, all the different things that they've been through throughout their childhood. And it was actually pretty heartbreaking at times. It was a really, really good family drama. I will say the one thing I didn't like about this book is like the ending kind of felt underwhelming. Like the climax, like it didn't feel like it resolved in the best way. So yeah, really, really good, very beautiful cover. And then the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? So, for this question, basically all of this shelf and then all of that shelf up there. I have been trying to get through my physical TBR lately, like all of the books here, of the books that I haven't read, because since I started working at the bookstore, I can get like ARCs and staff out books and damaged copies for free, or I even can get discounted books. Like if I just buy a book, I get it discounted. And so I've kind of been trying to like hold myself back from getting a bunch of books, which hasn't entirely worked, because pretty much all of these books right here, plus, you know, Malibu Rising, One Great Lie, and Light Through the Leaves, and Vengeful, I have gotten from the store. So it's not entirely working, but I am working on trying to get through all of these books. That way I can just go at it with all of the free books that I can get and staffing out books and that kind of thing. I am doing a vlog series of purging my physical TBR. I have done 2 videos already in that vlog, which you can check out. I'm currently working on reading books for my mental health / eating disorder representation vlog, which I talked about briefly earlier. I have 2 more books to read. I have to finish Never Enough, and then I have 1 more book after that for that vlog. And then it will be up, so hopefully soon. But like aside from just like the general giant TBR that I have, the main books that I need to finish this year are Ninth House by Lee Bardugo, which I've actually read this book before, and this isn't the copy that I should be holding up, but I'm too lazy to go get the other one. I'm currently rereading this book and annotating it for my friend Lexi, because every year for our birthdays, we annotate one of our favorite books, and then we give it to the other person, and then we get to read that person's favorite book with their annotations. So I'm currently annotating a copy for Lexi. It is a paperback, so it's not this copy because this is my copy, but I'm too lazy to go get it because it's like all the way over there. So I'm like 100 or so pages into annotating it. The problem with Ninth House is it's pretty long and it's also pretty dark. So like you really have to take your time with this book. The first time I read this, it took me 5 months. So like it's definitely a long haul, but it's so good and I really enjoy it. It's like slow going with my annotating process for that book, but I do need to finish it soon and definitely before the year ends. The other book I chose specifically for this prompt is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab because, like I said, I absolutely loved Vicious. And I bought a copy of this while I was at the store because I'm like, I need it. So I definitely need to get to it soon and read it because I'm super excited to read this book. So that's it for my mid-year book freakout tag. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you're subscribed down below so you don't miss any future videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, all my links are in the description box down below, as they always are. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!
All you see is black roses. Couldn't remember this whole Don't ask for something more than you